Let's talk about another very common question that I get from students regularly. And many people have some kind of difficulty with their speaking to a greater or lesser degree. And these difficulties are often either stammering or stuttering while speaking. Some people experience it only when they speak a foreign language, such as English, and others experience it in their own language as well as with other languages. Now, for the IELTS exam, if somebody has a professional's assessment, such as yourself, then they do get a little bit of lenience and they can indicate that during their application.
Oh, okay.
However,
Yeah.
that isn't always the case, and it's not always available to many candidates to have that professional assessment. So they just have to overcome it. And my question here is, what can people do to lessen the impact of, for instance, stammering in their IELTS interview?
Yeah. First of all, I would suggest that they actually get help with a speech pathologist. But if that isn't available for them, as you said, sometimes it isn't, then it's tricky, because with stammering, the more nervous you get, often the more you stammer. So for this case, in this case, I would say practice, 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 practice. Okay. The more you know your material, the more you will be relaxed, the less likely you are to stammer or stutter. The other thing you can do is, when you're practicing your material, you could start, so this is sort of one of the techniques that is used to actually help people in this case. So what you can do is, you don't start with really long sentences. You start with short 2-word, 3-word, 4-word sentences, whichever level you have to, in order for you to not stutter.
Yeah, that's, again, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's one of the most fundamental parts of overcoming such difficulties as anxiousness and stammering, is to practice and to be well practiced. Do you have any other insights that maybe you can give students to correct for these speech impediments?
Yeah. So if you take 2 words at a time of whatever you're doing, let's say you're going to talk about art as one of the topics. So you say, my opinion, my opinion, my opinion, my opinion, and you get that flowing. And then you use another 2 words and another 2 with the next 2 and the next 2 and the next 2. Then if you're really flowing with those 2, you do 3 or 4 words together, and you do the whole thing again. I know it's a bit of an effort, but it's what you're doing is habituating your neurology and the centers of your brain that work with rhythm and tempo neurologically and physiologically to get it smoother so that it's not stuttering. And then you make it longer and longer. That's if you don't have an availability to a speech therapist. So that will help. So you're allowing yourself to see that you can get longer and longer without having to stutter. Yeah. There are other speech problems that I have come across with students who want to go for the IELTS, or who have wanted to reduce their accent or be clearer in English. One, for instance, is in the person's original language, they don't have particular consonants or vowels. And so it's harder to learn those. But again, we can put those in for people. But another real sort of speech problem is, well, that goes back to also, some people say to me, even in my own language, I speak too quickly and I swallow up my words, right? This was actually a Spanish speaker, so this was a surprise, because Spanish is spoken really quickly anyway. It's like da 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 da, you know. And he said, even in Spanish, I swallow up my words. That's called cluttering, and it's again a rhythm problem. So the areas in the brain that allow you to pace your rhythm in any language, and English is a stress time language, so it's da 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 da, whereas say Spanish or a lot of other languages that are syllable timed, dot, 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 dot. So he would go, in English, he would say, okay, so I work on a building site, and then and at the end it would all just get cluttered up because he couldn't control the rhythm. So for someone like that, just making your vowels longer. Okay, and you have yeah, you have to do that. I mean, I could say slow down, but though it's hard for people with that to slow down. That's why they're not slowing down. You know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah, and even to be clearer in the IELTS exam, you have to, even if you're nervous, just going back to that point we talked about before, you have to make sure your vowels are long enough to speak English. So for somebody who can't, you know, at the end of the sentence, all of a sudden everything gets gobbled up, they're a clutterer, then to make sure that you're stretching your stress, your emphasized vowels in the syllable that is the accented syllable, if you will, in English. So if I say, some people say, I have to go, okay?
Yeah. And I agree.
Yeah.
I think in English, it's definitely the vowels that we often emphasize. And I think that oftentimes when people who are non-native speakers of English, they feel uncomfortable with those awkwardly long sounding vowels. And one phrase that comes to my mind is, so what you are saying to me is that I should also go to the store with you. And there's so many I, you, we. And to a non-native speaker of English, they would be like, whoa, that's, you know, would they think that's a joke?
Yeah.
But no, to another native English ear, that would sound like a perfectly okay sentence with a lot of emphasis on the rephrasing of that person asking whether or not they should go to the store with them. So it wouldn't be a laughable situation. Yeah. Maybe I was a bit extreme, but not much.
Yeah.
So definitely, and I think practicing that's again another great tip. Which, in fact, leads me into my next question, and this is another very, very common point of debate among IELTS students, are natural fillers like and which in fact are those vowel sounds being dragged out to allow for time to think and to avoid that cluttering that you were mentioning. Now, a lot of students learn from certain sources that they will lose marks if they use natural fillers in their IELTS speaking interview. And I keep telling them that this isn't necessarily the case. As a speech therapist, what is your professional opinion about the use of natural fillers like and in the English language?
Yeah, I actually think they're fine unless there are some people who speak English who and then they think about and then they say, I went to if it's every 2 words, it disturbs the communication, it disturbs the flow. But if I'm in the middle of an IELTS exam and I say, well, you know, I come from, you know, I don't know, Paris, and I come from Paris, and I came from a very small village, and it's a beautiful village, and my grandparents still live there. That sort of filler is okay. But if I do every 2 words, I do or then it disturbs the community. That's my thinking. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts exactly the same. I always tell students that you have to assess it from the perspective of, does the use of natural filler, do the use of natural fillers impede coherence? So again, it's going back to that initial point that we were talking about earlier of coherence and all of these different communication elements of the language, such as stuttering, stammering, pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, tying into coherence, whether or not the listener can clearly understand the conversation. And natural fillers can they're like a double-edged sword. And I know students love idioms, and here's a great way to use this one. A double-edged sword means that in one way, it's very useful, and in another way, it can hurt the user.
Yes.
Natural fillers are just that, because used correctly, they are natural. They're part of natural language. Almost all people, I don't like to use superlatives, but almost all people, I would argue, use natural fillers in one form or another. And when they're used well, they can be valuable to buy time to think about better words, better grammar, better information. However, when they're overused because words are not coming to the user's mind, they're not sure about what they're wanting to say, they're overly nervous, then that's going to impede coherence and comprehensibility in the communication. So that's my take. And I totally if agree. I'm feeling you correctly here, Esther, that's exactly what you were saying as well.
Yeah, totally agree. And you can do what you just said, which is stretch things, but that stretching is not just for thinking. Sometimes it's for intonation and for inference and nuance. Yeah? So, well, I'm not sure. I'll come with you. All of that stretching, and there was no filler in there, is telling the listener in English that you're not sure you really want to come. You know? But yeah, I'll come because I know you want me to come. Yeah? And I was working with, fillers, I agree with you. They're a double-edged sword. They are important sometimes, but if they get in the way, it's not good. But I just wanted to go...
Importantly... Yeah. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, Esther.
No, go ahead. Finish. Yeah, importantly. Go on. Yeah.
Importantly, using natural fillers in IELTS and when communicating in English, it's vital that it's English natural fillers. So natural fillers vary from language to language.
Yes.
And I have come across numerous situations where either in the worst cases, candidates are using natural fillers from their own language. For instance, in Japanese, natural fillers are very different. Natural fillers in Japanese are e, to, a, no. And if I'm speaking English, e, to, and then I go a, no, and then continue on, that's going to sound extremely strange for the examiner. So it must be avoided at all costs. Using non-English fillers will certainly drop scores. Now, the less extreme case are where students are using English natural fillers such as and but not really in an English kind of way. So in a kind of more of an awkward, non-native sort of way. And that's even tricky for me to mimic, but it's like when I'm talking like and then like a jerky or a quick and it's not really sounding English. And then I go, okay, that sounded like an but not quite like an English speaker. So it's important that candidates practice natural English fillers.
That's a really interesting point, Adrian. I agree with you about the fillers, and often we don't think about those as much. But I think it's in the auditory attention to detail, which again is another point, and the length of the vowel. That could be which is and they have to go up as well. You have to listen to whether they're down or up or flat, and I think also at that higher level of IELTS, starting to pay attention to way before that already anyway, but active listening to how people are saying these things around you. So not just, as you said before, the grammar, the vocabulary, the syntax, etc. But how did they lengthen that out? How did they go up? Did they go down, etc.? Those auditory memory or attention nuances. I often have people who, they're living in an English-speaking country. They have English-speaking people all around them, but they don't notice how the person is saying that word. They'll say competition instead of competition, for instance, and yet people are saying that word all around them, but they're not switching on their attentive listening. It's the same with a grammar phrase, do you leave an A or a the out? Well, have a listen to how the people around you are saying it, And I think active listening, once people are, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, 8, 9, they're pretty good at English. It's these other nuances that they now need to start listening to. Well, anyway, they're my thoughts on that one. But,
I think those are extremely valuable. So simply put, a mimicry of the language and being comfortable mimicking the language.
Yeah.
I often tell students to think with the mind of a child. Children are very comfortable to experiment with language, and as adults learning a language, we need to be the same. So we shouldn't be shy to experiment with the language. And oftentimes when we feel awkward in our pronunciation of that language, that's when we're most accurately using that language. And that's true in English as well. So I tell a student that if you're feeling awkward in your intonation, your pronunciation, you're probably actually getting closer to what it should sound like, because it is different and it is maybe melodramatic compared to your language. So those are all very, very great tips. Okay, so for lots more help with the speaking section of the IELTS exam, you can visit our websites, aehelp.com for academic IELTS and gieltshelp.com for general IELTS. Also, to get tons of help for your speaking and to truly improve rapidly, I highly recommend reaching out to speakmoreclearly.com. The professionals there, and they are on standby ready to help you improve and sound more like a native, and definitely sound clearer and communicate better. Esther, any closing thoughts or suggestions for students about how to best prepare for their IELTS speaking interview?
I think, as you were saying about paying attention, they need to know what they're paying attention to as well. So each time you take a different thing, like the rhythm or the intonation or the pausing or so I think breaking it down and going, now I'm going to pay attention to the intonation, now I'm going to pay things that usually they don't pay attention to because they're busy trying to learn English, but then start to hear for it, to listen for it. I think they're the main things I wanted to get across. I agree with you. I agree with you. If it feels different, then it means you're probably closer to what you're meant to be doing rather than doing what you're usually used to doing. So
That's brilliant, Esther, and I think that's an extremely valuable closing point, is to not tackle the entire language, communication and speaking all at once, but to break it into pieces, to identify weaknesses and to target those weaknesses. And I think that's a common mistake by many learners, is that they feel that if they just practice speaking, and they're trying all of that together, then that will be the most efficient way to improve. And it's just not the case. It's not bad. It's important to do that. Lots of practice is good. But the way that they practice, and as you said, breaking it into those elements and then targeting those elements, is a much, much more effective way. Thank you so much, and thank you for this wonderful conversation. I think it's very valuable for many of our viewers. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I hope so, and for our viewers too. And thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been really good.
Thank you, Esther. Have a lovely rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Subscribe to our channel. Click over here. Watch another video. Click right up here. And click our IELTS Hero to join our premium package and get access to all of our videos, practice exams, and a fully interactive course.